Hello, everybody. Guten Morgen, or whatever, however you say good morning in that language, or whatever time of day it happens to be wherever you are. Hello, welcome to another ESAS. We're getting back into videos after the Erd Tree arc. That was fun, but ultimately there were still issues. But for now, we're going to be getting back into some videos. I picked a shorter one for this Saturday, so probably won't be a super long stream. But we're going to be reacting to Dark Souls 2 Isn't Ganky, You're Just Bad, which sounds like an excellent title for a video to get people to click and then hate the video. So let's get into that in a moment. But first, I wanted to mention a few things. I'm going to be working on some extra bits and bobs for the stream. I'm going to kind of work on building sort of like different clips that I can use for intros and outros, since I like my intro music right now, but I'd like to tweak it a little bit. And I'd also like to have an outro thing as just sort of a, like, this is the stream ending. Here's some fun music or something to play while, you know, the stream is ending. I want to make it a little bit more high production in that sense. I also want some, I just wanted to mention that since the Elden Ring streaming proved pretty successful overall, I'd like to stream Sekiro, since I've not played it more than like 3 hours, and also because I need help. So I would like help with it. So if you would like me to stream Sekiro, I am more than willing to do it. Since I don't have that many videos left to sort of react to in my list. So we'll get through this, a couple of big ones, and maybe play Sekiro, or we'll bounce back and forth. I don't know yet. But we'll see how it goes. But without further ado, let's get into this video, and we'll see how it goes. I've already anticipated some of what this guy's probably gonna say, so let's see how his video compares to other people's criticisms of the Gankfest that is known as Dark Souls 2. So let's get into it and see what he has to say.
Hello, hello, my fellow ass cheeks. I'm your host, the Great Ass Beat, and I'm here today to talk about one of my favorite games of all time, Dark Souls. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Okay, this is like a dumb voice. All right, I'm here to talk.
I was about to say, I was like, I hope he doesn't talk like that the entire video, because holy shit, I'd want to like shoot myself. Oh boy.
Talk about Dark Souls 2. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I've recently been on a Dark Souls 2 video watching binge, right? I've been watching all the critiques about the game. And honestly, they're kind of bad, right?
You know those things that don't conform to my opinion? Well, they're bad. They're just bad. They're just bad. He gives me that sort of energy where it's just like, people who disagree with me, they're evil. Gives me that kind of thing. Gives me that kind of vibe.
And it's not because the production quality is particularly bad, or even the things that they are saying are particularly bad. The real problem is that they don't know how to play the game.
They don't know how to play the game. Well, I mean, considering that you can beat the game a variety of ways, I would assume that you know how to play the game if you can beat it, because that's an avenue to beat the game. So, I mean, now if somebody criticized Dark Souls 2 and didn't finish it, I'd say that's a mark against them, just because I think you should finish the thing before you like have any sort of final opinion. You know, like getting halfway through like a game and then like just giving a review of it and then not finishing it, I think is a massive point against the person reviewing it. But we'll see what he has to say about people just not playing the game right, because this is often where a lot of people diverge into like a lot of the arguments I've found that deal with people that criticize Dark Souls 2. A lot of the rebuttals from people is A, you're playing the game wrong. B, you're just bad at the game, and C, the game's difficulty is just generic from software difficulty, right? Those tend to be the three biggest defenses, quote unquote, of Dark Souls 2. You know, where it's the player's fault. It's the player's fault. Get good, right? And that tends to be a problem with discussion of this game is a lot of people don't like to actually discuss what the game does differently from the previous games and from the games that come after, right? And a lot of people like to ignore that when defending the game, which is a significant problem with the discussion. Is if you cannot discuss what is actually in the game that is objectively comparable to previous games and games afterwards, then you are not having an argument. You're just yelling at me because you disagree with me. It's no longer an argument where you're making points, you're showing evidence, and you're explaining your philosophy and your outlook on whatever you happen to be arguing about, right? You're no longer having an argument. You're just being a dick because I don't like, the thing that you like for the same reasons, right? You're not even criticizing an opinion at that point. You're sort of just anti-opinion at that point. It's oh man, we're 40 seconds in. I was hoping this stream would be short, but let's see how it goes.
And I'm probably going to title this video like Dark Souls 2 isn't Ganky, you're just bad, or something like that. Really stir up the pot, because we all know the key to any great discourse is to be as inflammatory as possible, as bad faith as possible, obviously. Now, that being said,
Okay, with him starting off with the bad faith thing, I have a feeling that he's going to use a whole bunch of bad faith arguments to defend Dark Souls 2, right? I bet this is going to be one of those things where I bet he like many people that defend Dark Souls 2, they seem to just claim that we're fanboys of Dark Souls 1, and that's why we hate it, is because it's different, which I've mentioned several times. The first Souls game I played was Dark Souls 2. The first Souls game that I completed was Dark Souls 2. The first Souls game I beat multiple times was Dark Souls 2. So I'm not coming from nostalgia. I'm coming from the series as this game has several problems, both on a technical level, a design philosophy level, and just content level as well. Like, this game has a lot of significant issues that the other games do not have. And the biggest problem that a lot of people think is that it's not the biggest problem with discussing this game is a lot of people think you go into it hating it because it's not like Dark Souls 1 or Demon Souls, right? That's not the problem, right? The problem is that Demon Souls and Dark Souls got a lot of things right when it comes to how the difficulty in these games works, how the level design works, how your stats should affect you getting through the game and stuff like that, right? The first two games got a lot of things right. So to see the sequel to one of those games and the sequel to a spiritual successor to that game get so many things wrong is why this game is criticized so heavily, right? It's because this game's idea of difficulty is fundamentally different from the previous two games, right? And I will probably stick to saying the previous two games because that's the important bit, right? It's not where the franchise went after this, it's where the franchise was beforehand, right? Because you can't retroactively, say this game's terrible because a game later down the line fixed problems with it. It's like, no, it's like this game's terrible because it should have been better given things that came before. And this is one thing where, from what I understand of the Souls series, this is the least selling one, which I think says a lot because the trajectory of every other From Software game that's in this sort of style has steadily gone up over the years. Now, some of the other games have kind of been more niche. Like, as far as I know, Sekiro, I think, is the most niche game they've ever made, but I still think it sold like pretty well. Like, I think at least like 5 million copies, something like that. But I think it is indicative of the quality of the game that this game has sort of been the black sheep of the series, both in sales and in reception by the fan base, right? I don't think any other game has as much of a divisive break as this game does. Elden Ring might come close now, but I'll talk about Elden Ring in a video way later down the line. But for right now, Dark Souls 2, I think, has sort of earned its reputation given how many things were changed and were different and were made arbitrarily difficult compared to the difficult but fair angle that happened through 95% of the previous two games. They're not perfect, mind you. None of these games are perfect, especially on the difficulty versus fairness thing. But Dark Souls 2 definitely pushes the line way farther than the others in terms of the difficult but unfair angle, and we're getting into that. So let's see what points he brings up, because right now he's just said, let's just stir the pot,
I really do want to talk about this because a lot of times the people who are playing this game, they don't seem to understand that Dark Souls 2 is actually pretty faithful to the Souls series in general. And I'm probably going to make this video on my game development channel in a longer form, talking about the changes between Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, and then, of course, how Dark Souls 3 really isn't a Dark Souls sequel. It's more like a Bloodborne sequel, which.
Woo. DS2 is a fucking masterpiece. Well, I mean, if you want to think that, you're free to think that.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. There are
Dark Souls 2 doesn't deserve his reputation. Well, I mean, that's what I don't think Dark Souls 2 is a bad game. It's bad by Souls standards. Like, there are a lot of things that every other Souls game does better, more consistently, and there's a lot of arbitrary difficulty. Best PvP in Souls, fight me. I mean, I don't do PvP, so I find PvP atrocious just in all the games. That's one thing I don't enjoy about all the games. So, yeah, I'm not a PvP person.
just big trade-offs that Dark Souls 3 had to do that I really feel hampered the Souls experience for me personally. But to get back to Dark Souls 2 and what Dark Souls 2 really likes to focus on, and really what makes the game very interesting, is level design. And I know a lot of videos like to say level design when they're talking about map layout or level layout, like how the level.
Oh man, that's like nothing says peak Souls game than tricking a boss off the edge. Nothing says that. That's half the game. Half the game is not PvP. Right? If you just strictly content-wise, that's not half the game. PvP is definitely a large aspect of the game, but it's not nearly as important as everything else in the game, like the levels and the bosses and the NPC quest lines and all that other stuff.
Actually connect to each other. That's not level design. Level design is actually.
Wait a minute.
What
did he
a lot
just
of
say?
videos like to say level design when they're talking about map layout or level layout, like how the levels actually connect to each other. That's not level design.
That literally is level design. Level design is anything that impacts the location and placement of the areas you go to in a game. It all counts. Now, if you want to talk about specific levels in comparison to other levels, that's one thing too, right? Like there are sort of subcategories within level design, right? Like there's the overall package of how the entire world works, and then there's the levels that you can differentiate by area or whatever. Scholar the First Sin fixed a lot of bullshit from vanilla ES2. Like what? I mean, it runs smoother. I mean, there's a lot of things in Scholar that are exactly the same. Like a lot of the problems in Dark Souls 2 are still present in Scholar. Scholar just runs a little better, right? And the enemies are switched around, and a couple things are changed. Like some encounters aren't as annoying as before, but many of them become even more annoying because they stuff them full of more enemies. There are a lot of problems that are at the core of Dark Souls 2 that were carried over into Scholar.
Level design is actually understanding how the level changes players' behaviors. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, a very simple example is the rafters in Anne Orlando. When you get to it, I'm assuming that majority of you guys are not willing to dodge at this point because if you dodge, you're going to fall off the edge and you're going to die. That's level design. It's specifically saying, hey, this is how the level is. You can dodge if you want. It's just very risky, right? And Dark Souls.
It's like, you know what level design is? Something that deals with the levels but isn't the levels themselves. It's that. Oh man, I'm so tired of people having the roundabout logic of like, instead of talking about the thing, they talk about how everything is impacted by the thing instead of talking about the thing. I love that clip of you getting one-shotted by Radon's grab. Fucking love it on a spiritual level. I'm glad you love it. I didn't. I feel like a lot of these arguments are going to be like the looping arguments in this video where he's talking about everything but the point he's talking about. Like what he just did with level design, saying level design isn't really about level design, it's about everything that is impacted by level design. It's like, so shouldn't we talk about the root of that? A lot of encounters have been changed to make it more fair. I would recommend Domo 3000 channel for video examples. Well, I don't need video examples. I've played Scholar and I've played Dark Souls 2. There are more enemies in several encounters in Dark Souls 2. There are several encounters that have been made worse by additional enemies being added, particularly in the early levels. You can look at the area that he's going into, like in that upper area. There are way more enemies in Scholar. Way more enemies in Scholar. Hade's Tower, for an example. The Hade Knights are all placed there now. And when you activate one, you activate them all, right? So then they'll all come after you. Granted, they are optional, but still, they will all come after you. And there are just intrinsically more enemies. Like, they have made several areas more difficult by just stuffing them with more enemies. Now, where they change some enemy locations, I think, is a point in your favor, though, where some of the encounters have been made a little bit more manageable. Like the location of the second sort of undead chariot horse enemy in Dragonlance Castle, right, where the 6 archers used to be. That change I'm okay with, because you basically have an arena and you can fight sort of a mini boss in it, right? That's a change that I think is actually a good one, right? Where you like shake things up a bit, you give them a mini boss to defeat, and then you get like a ring out of it. I forget what the ring does, but that's an encounter that I think is an improvement, where you're not getting spammed by multiple enemies. But a lot of the other areas in the game do have more enemies placed in them. The build up, the initial area, once you're inside Dragonlance Castle too, like next to the first bonfire, in that room with all the stone guys you have to kill near the doors to unlock them, there are way more enemies in Scholar than there are in the base Dark Souls 2, right? That's another example. Like, I can put examples up. Like, I don't need to show clips. Just go to those areas. You will see what I'm talking about. This video is great, by the way. I like DS2 a lot more now, making it all the more noticeable when suck-off artists like this guy try to defend the game. Don't defend people like this. They are douches. This is the thing. I like Dark Souls 2. It just, on an objective level, it does several things incorrectly that are not to the benefit of the Souls series. Like, I really enjoy playing Dark Souls 2. I have a lot of fun with it. I don't hate the game, but there are objective problems with it that you have to acknowledge, right? Ganking's a problem. Iframe tweaking is a problem. The way healing works in the game is a very bad problem for, making the difficulty angle. The game's not difficult, as many people think it is, once you get life gems and once you just steadily resupply them as you go. Like, if you take the game cautiously and use your level, like Mahler brought this up in his video series talking about DS2. And it's a point where, if you go through the game cautiously and you spend all your souls basically at each checkpoint, by the time you reach each checkpoint, go back to the hub, level up, any extra souls, put into life gems. If you just take those couple steps, you will probably be fine through the game, except for extreme circumstances, right? There are a couple of circumstances where you're just going to get fucked because the system is just built to fuck you. In certain areas. The gutter is a great example of this, where the enemies deal absurd damage, right? And the scaffolding underneath you will break, right, in the dark. And there's other examples of that where just enemies deal absurd damage, right? Like the enemy that backstabs you when you're about to complete your first loop through Aleum Lois, right? That enemy will backstab you and will deal enough damage where he can kill several players in that one attack, or at the very least, put them very close to death, right? You've also got several mimics in the base Dark Souls 2 that for some reason were taken out of Scholar. I don't really get why. But you have the mimic thing where they will hit you from any direction instead of in front of them, and they will deal significant, if not fatal damage 99% of the time. Like, they are pretty much guaranteed to kill you unless you have dumped all your levels into health, right? There are significant balancing problems. Yes, there's way more enemies in that area, but they only aggro if you go near them, making it more manageable instead of all of them going directly after you the moment you enter the zone. Well, I mean, just because you put more enemies that only aggro when you get near them in an area where you're probably going to move around in combat doesn't mean that they won't aggro, like, slowly. You know, like putting more enemies in an area doesn't actually make the encounter better, right? Like if we took the Undead Berg area where you have a couple of those hollows, you know, I forget how many there are. I think there's the archer, then there's like 3 dudes on the ground, like right where the Drake appears. If we took that area and put 3 times as many of them, but they aggroed slowly, does that make the encounter better when you can slowly aggro each of them, or does that drastically slow down the game because you're just fighting the same enemies over and over and over and over in the same space, right? When you know that aggroing them, you know, one at a time is better than trying to rush in and fight all of them at once, right? It doesn't make the encounter better just because they don't all aggro at once. It's the total package of it that renders it more tedious rather than challenging, right? Like if you can aggro an enemy and then just walk away, you know, like if you can pull individual enemies from a group slowly, yeah, you can deal with the challenge, you can put up with it, you can deal with the difficulty of that encounter. But that doesn't mean the encounter is fun when you have to sit back and just shoot an enemy, fight them, shoot another enemy, fight them, and just, you know, if you have to use the exact same strategy over and over and over and over to deal with one area full of many enemies, you're basically just circumventing the problem, right? Which is still there. It's that you swipe at the horde, you back away, repeat, right? Or you snipe at the horde, pick off one, kill them, back away, repeat the whole thing again, right? It's the same overall process, the same mechanical process of there's a large group of enemies, I need to deal with them. They all aggro at once. Okay, well, I have to swipe at the horde and circle around them and slowly beat them down. Or they don't all aggro, and I just have to snipe the ones that I can get or lure them away individually, which drastically slows down the pace of the game when I know that there's a gank fest in front of me, and the only way to avoid it is to slowly pick off the enemies. Similar to if you just fought them in a big group and swatted at them. You know, it's the same overall issue of just you've put too many enemies in the area, and that affects how the encounter works. You know, this is one reason why a lot of areas with one single tough enemy are usually pretty well regarded because they're a tough enemy, but there's only one of them, right? You're not getting ganked. You know, there's no potential for gankage. At that point, it relies more on the move set and how fair the scaling is for that individual like enemy that you're fighting, right? As opposed to what happens a lot in Dark Souls 2 and Scholar, where they just add more enemies. They just stuff the area with more enemies. It's like, yeah, you can slowly aggro them away, but that doesn't really help the encounter when the best solution is just aggro them and run away and then fight them, right? Like at that point, you're just arbitrarily extending the playtime that you're fighting the enemies or dealing with the encounter. You know, you're not improving the encounter's quality. You're just making it last longer. All right. I need to catch up on some chat. All right. However, the Lost Giants still have terrible hitboxes. They do. Bringing up reminds me, having the frozen mimic in Aleum Lois resume his position when the ice breaks is actually a super cool. Yes, that's a cool thing. That's a cool tell that, hey, there's a mimic here. You know, that's a cool sort of tease. You know, and it's true, but you don't have to kill them all, I would say. Same for the large group of Taurus demons in DS1. Well, like sometimes that is true, right? Where you can just kind of kill a couple enemies and then run past the rest because they don't aggro because of X, Y, or Z. And I don't have a problem with that. You know, it's my problem is when you have a large group of enemies in the area and then they do aggro, either through being near them or through like a trigger, right? And that's a problem in Dark Souls 2 where you'll fight one enemy and then several other enemies that are not in line of sight, mind you, activate as well. You know, you can really tell when the game is programmed to throw an enemy at you because you'll do something to one enemy and then other enemies will activate to begin the gank, right? And several encounters throughout Dark Souls 2 and Scholar have that problem. You know, and you can see that a lot in Iron Keep, for example. You know, where you might trigger one of the Alon little dudes, not the big dudes, but the little ones, the regular ones. You can trigger one of them, and then several more will come because the game has registered that the gank is here. The player is in position. Send the gank squad, kill them. You know, there are a lot of moments like that throughout the games, and it's very frustrating when you know that's coming. because when you don't know it's coming, it leads to you getting ganked, right? Where you use a lot of resources to survive and deal with the threat, or you deal with them and move on, but maybe you die, right? Or you back up into an area you've already been and slowly poke at them from sort of a doorway, right? It doesn't allow the enemies, it doesn't allow the player to enjoy the enemy on their own, right? And enjoy the move set, because you're dealing with like 5 different enemies, 4 different enemies, 3 different enemies, sometimes even more, that have the same move set, but you're swiping at them and then running away because you know that if you try to slap them all down instantly, sometimes you'll just get screwed, and you'll get combo killed to death. And a lot of those things, a lot of those encounters impact how playing the game works, right? Like my biggest thing is these games are not like, say, like an Assassin's Creed game, right? Where if you're attacking one guy, if someone attacks you from behind, you can counter them, right? Now that's in a lot of the older Assassin's Creed games. I'd never played anything past Black Flag, so let me know if that's changed. But that sort of principle of being able to counter somebody who surprise attacks you, right, is something those games did well, like in the earlier days, right? Dark Souls 2 doesn't do that. There's no counter button to deal with that. You're committed to animations in the game, and that's part of the challenge. Is when you do an action, you commit to it, right? And very rarely will you be able to get out of it. But anyway, let's get back into the video.
Dark Souls 2 does this a lot, and want is just very risky, right? And Dark Souls 2 does this a lot. And in fact, that's one of Dark Souls 2's biggest strength, is that it has a lot of levels that ask the player, hey, pay attention. You can utilize this. You can make your life easier. And one of the examples that everyone likes to bring up when it comes to Dark Souls 2 being incredibly bad is Iron Keep and Shrine of Amana. And you know what? I decided to have a playthrough. I wanted to see how bad it could actually get, because when I played through these levels, I did it with ranged weapons. So I was like, okay, you know what? Let me play through this normally, because every time I played these levels, I never had the experience that a lot of these critics have, which is a little weird, right? So I wanted to go through and be like, okay, let's actually play through this with zero way of actually doing range combat, except for throwables, because throwables are available to everyone. So I got to
ranged items are available to everybody too. Like, we can all pick up a bow and level up like 2 things, and then we're good. Yeah, but I cannot wait to see what his conclusion is. This is one of those things where just he's like, I like the combat being tedious and rolling around half the time. I love this. Oh, well, I never had that happen to me. Yeah, well, it happened to a lot of other people. Yeah, it's like, just because you play games differently doesn't mean that the entire audience plays the same way, which is a really weird thing I've seen a lot of other people say. Like, a lot of people that defend Dark Souls 2 have that sort of mentality, right? I've seen it in a lot of different videos where they assume people play like them, and I don't get why that is. It's like, just, you should know that people aren't like you, right? You should know that people don't play the same.
To Iron Keep, and how bad was it? It wasn't bad at all. In fact, it was pretty enjoyable. There wasn't that big of an issue, and in fact, during this run, I also specifically decided not to level up ADP, and you can look in the footage yourself. I'm not having any issues with this. The majority of my deaths when it came to this part of the Iron Keep, the initial part, were to the Smelter Demon, because my dodge timings weren't perfect, and I ended up getting caught in some combos. I don't know if they were true combos or if like the game maybe just wasn't reading my dodge input, but I also died a lot.
Hey, it looks like you're just bad at the game. Completely ignoring Smelter's combo that's probably coming. Man, makes you think, doesn't it?
Because I decided to use the Zweihander in the middle of this, and the R2 for the Zweihander can be targeted, which led to a lot of situations where I ended up hitting the wall next to the enemy, and then the enemy killed me. So, and also,
man, he's just playing the game really badly. It's like the enemy is not like, look at this little bit here with him like fighting this enemy. Like, watch him fight this enemy. All right, less than half health. There's a sniper in the background, right? He gets hit.
Led to a lot of situations where I ended up hitting the wall next to
the enemy in front of him is not doing an attack, and he decides to heal at low health, like the enemy is fully able to attack him during that heal, right? What you would want to do in that situation is wait for the archer to shoot, and if your dodging was appropriate, especially if you had ADP working appropriately, then he'd be able to dodge both attacks at once, heal, get the heal off, and probably kill this enemy. But because he's desperately avoiding dodging using the ADP, he's not gonna make it, and he dies, which is funny.
To the enemy, and then the enemy killed me. So, and also another thing I should mention, all of this footage is with me with a level 0 weapon, except for the Cestus. The Cestus is the only weapon that I use in this footage that would be level 6 at this time. But all the weapons I'm using, the Black Steel Katana, the Zweihander, both of those weapons are level 0. So again, this is very doable. It's possible. You just have to pay attention.
He's missing. He's skipping over a lot of footage in here. He's skipping around a lot, and I think that's intentional because notice how he did the room he previously would have come out of here, but now he's doing the end of the room. He's not dealing with all of the enemies that were in that room, right? You know, like he's cutting. If you wanted to show this footage, I would just show it raw to show that you didn't have any problems, right? But he's not doing that. And I would assume it's because he knows there are problems. He knows there's a gank coming. But yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Dying to Smelter is crazy. Good. LeMayo. See, I remember that spot. Thankfully, the enemies aren't too powerful, but the door you entered closing felt like such a troll. Let's see. Oh, it's a problem, especially if it's the first time seeing an enemy, like the group of testicle men near the petrified NPC. Yeah, that area is particularly egregious just because they apply like effects on top of ganking you in a small area. And this is one problem too, is a lot of players will unfreeze Rosabeth and then pull the lever naturally. And so you're worried about enemies that can, you're worried about a group of enemies in a tight space, along with avoiding hitting an NPC in that tight space, with a basilisk also attacking you, right? Not to mention the status ailment that the testicle guys apply, right? They don't apply it like extremely, but they still apply it, right? So those are a lot of elements that make that encounter very sort of like, holy fuck, how do I deal with this? And it usually involves, you know, smacking the crap out of the enemies as fast as possible before things get out of hand and the NPC gets killed, because that's very possible there. That encounter is not one where, like, there's a high chance of having that NPC be killed in that area, or at the very least the player dying because they don't want to kill the NPC by accident. You know, it's not one of those areas that you bring up as like ooh, that's a good area. No, it's like, no, it's not. There are a lot of problems in that area. But also him just kind of going through this area. It's one of those things where it seems like a lot of the points he's bringing up is like, I didn't upgrade anything. You know, it feels like he's trying to dunk on people that criticize this area, but he completely forgets that a lot of the problems with this area are the ganking that happens, and he skipped over one of the first areas where the ganking can happen. Like in this room, in Scarlett, there are several of these knights here. Like I think there's probably 4 in this room. Right, and he probably slowly pulled them out and then like slowly slapped them down with the weak weapon, which again, having the weak weapon is such a weird thing because it's like, why didn't you, like, it's an unnecessary like step to own the chuds, as it were, when you didn't have to do that, because players hopefully are not going to go down this pathway with absolutely nothing upgraded, right? It's just it's one of those things where he's playing the game weird, and I don't think it really helps his point as much as it just proves that he's trying everything within his power to own the people that don't like Dark Souls 2, or at the very least criticize it.
This is very doable. It's possible. You just have to pay attention. You can even see in the footage that there are moments where I pause and show to the camera that you can see the ambushes coming up towards you. The game is telling you to slow down.
The game is telling you to slow down. What, you mean like several people who will probably take that pathway to the right to fight this guy as this guy's coming around them? You know, it's like just because the ambushes are, just because you're able to deal with the ambushes doesn't change the fact that the ambushes are built to catch you out. Right? The ambushes are rampant in this game. They are rampant with enemies dropping down, dropping out of little holes, coming out of nowhere. Right? And this is the thing. This enemy attacks you when they don't even fucking see you. Right? That tells you that developers were intending for players to go this way and then get ganked. Why else would this person activate? Like, we are not able to see this enemy before they activate. Right?
It's possible. You just have to pay attention. You can even see in the footage that there are moments where I pause and show to the camera
There's the enemy.
that you can see.
How did that enemy see you? How did that enemy see him? The devs coded it. When player crosses X line, both enemies are active. Or at the very least, this enemy becomes aware of player presence.
The ambush is coming up towards you. The game is telling you to slow down. Stop running into these fights. Stop going after the archers. Okay, if there's any rule in Dark Souls 2 you should probably, just listen to is don't go after the archers.
Hey, look at that. Another gank boy coming. His philosophy in this video is pretty much just why don't you just slow down? Just slow down, you retards. And it's like, dude, why is the only option available to slow down? If the game wants us to slow down, fine. That's the game trying to direct it to do shit. But when the game does the exact same shit over and over and over with these ambushes, where enemies slowly trickle in as you're dealing with other enemies, right? Do you expect players to just sit and wait for half the combat to make sure everybody comes over to them? That's really fucking boring, right? That's really fucking boring if you have to sit there and wait for the encounter to quote unquote start. Like this encounter, for example. He walked up, archer shooting at him. Okay, he doesn't go for the archer because he knows this ambush is coming, right? All right. Okay. So he deals with that enemy. And then this second ambusher comes, right? Like the time in between the archer shooting him and this first guy appearing. All right, let's see how far this goes.
It's possible. You just have to pay attention.
All right, see, that archer activated at like, what, 4:37. Let's see how long it takes the ambusher to show up.
You can even see in the footage that there are moments where I pause and show to the camera.
All right, so 4:43. Okay, so you've got roughly 6 seconds before this ambusher shows up. All right, so what are you thinking now? All right, let's see how long it takes for the second ambusher to show up.
That you can see the ambushes coming up towards you. The game is telling you to slow down. Stop running into these fights. Stop going after the archers. Okay, if there's any rule in Dark Souls 2, you should probably...
Yep, there's that other enemy appearing right there. Right, so you got a 6-second window before the ambush comes up. Okay, that's reasonable, right? Like, that's reasonable enough time for a player who's taking it cautiously to see the ambush. Okay. But then you've got this second guy showing up, right? And what happens if you miss the first one? You miss the second one as well. Right? And this is the problem with this game is these enemies are built to ambush you while you're dealing with an enemy on a precarious pathway. Right? And that's the thing that is like normally I don't really have a problem with, but this is like the 15th ambush like by this point in the game. Right? This is like the 15th, 20th ambush where enemies just slowly trickle in, trying to catch you out while you're dealing with an enemy. The developers obviously are coding all these ambushes with enemies attacking from very far out of the way, right? And it's not, in principle, it's not the problem. It's the philosophy of it, where they will take enemies that are out of sight, they will ambush you, and then they will continue to stream more ambushers into the experience. While you're dealing with an archer, while you're probably dealing with another archer as well if you fight a guy over here. And this is the part of the thing is, the difficult but fair angle. Knowing something is coming is not difficult but fair. If the telegraphing is fair, that's when you know it's fair, right? like a lot of like this is one reason why I have a problem with a lot of grabs. You don't really know what a grab is until you actually see it grab you, right? Sometimes you might think it's just an attack. That's one reason why I have problems with grabs in a lot of these games, is because you're not quite sure what the grab is, until they grab you, right? And that's one reason why I think that shield blocking should be able to avoid grabs, right? Like you knuckle up on your first playthrough or something, maybe with a shield, right? As just kind of a way to deal with the problems of the game, just because you're new, right? And you deal with things, and then maybe later on you see it's a grab or something, right? But getting back to talking about this and ambushes, a lot of the problems with Iron Keep are this slow trickle of enemies into an encounter that you have to deal with. And a lot of players are going to try to take out the archer, right? They might see this first guy, they might deal with this first guy, and this is one thing, he's playing this encounter absolutely correctly, right? Like, my problem is not the way he's playing it. The problem is that the game is designing it where these enemies will trickle in and fuck with you while you're on this pathway. It's intended for the player to go after the archer and then get ambushed by these two dudes, right? The encounter is built to fuck you, right? And that's part of the problem with a lot of encounters. Now, this isn't a particularly egregious ambush, right? Like some other ones. Like the build up to the blue smelter demon, that pathway is probably one of the worst pathways to a boss in terms of gauntlets from bonfire to boss in Dark Souls 2. I think there's an argument that can be made. That's a lot of really condensed pain, whereas the lead up from Aleum Lois, from the bonfire to the Twin Kitty fight, that's really tedious and annoying. So I think an argument can be made for both for different reasons as the worst boss gauntlet, but those things suffer from a lot of the problems that Dark Souls 2 has, where it's just stacking difficulty, right? And this is something I've had an issue with Elden Ring, is the stacking difficulty, where you give enemies with high health, high damage, high numbers, additional effects that fuck with the player's ability to deal with the encounter, like in Aleum Lois, the snow blinds you, for like a fairly long distance, and then you've got in the Smelter Demon run, the Blue Smelter Demon run, you have the guys that slow you down, right? That make you fat roll, right? That fucks with every build that dodges, which is going to be like most of them, right? It's just the game has put so many things into encounters that fuck with you as you go through the game, and they fuck with the way the game is supposed to work, right? Like, imagine a boss encounter where you deal with one type of enemy, and then, or not a boss encounter. Imagine just a regular encounter where you deal with one type of enemy, and then a different type of enemy comes in, and then a third different type of enemy comes in, right? And they trickle in slowly. Okay, could that become a gank fest if you don't deal with them within a certain time frame? Yes. Is it engaging because you're fighting 3 different enemies? Yes. Right? If you fought each of those enemies, but they doubled, and this was 6 stages of enemies entering instead of 3, that's going to make the encounter take longer, make them more difficult, but also make it more unfair because you're dealing with multiple enemies, right? You may know the move set, but now you're dealing with a system where the game is actively trying to throw a lot of enemies at you quickly that doesn't involve you being able to deal with it. This is one reason why a lot of people can have a problem with the Four Kings fight in Dark Souls 1, is because it's a DPS race. If you don't do enough damage in a short enough span of time, this is a it's a problem where if you don't do the boss gimmick correctly, as in damage it as fast as possible, you're going to get ganked by the Four Kings eventually, right? That's part of the challenge of that boss. But it's also a part of the game where, if you know that, and this is part of the reason why second playthroughs are important in these games. The second playthrough tells you a lot about how players deal with encounters they know are coming, right? Like, his dealing with this encounter was just, I'm going to sit and wait for the enemy to come to me, right? Because if I don't, I'm going to get attacked by multiple enemies on that walkway if I try to go for the archer, right? Or I'm going to get shot at by the archer while I'm dealing with this guy and that other guy behind him, right? It's the amalgamation of how do you deal with the threat, right? Like, dealing with threats in this game often devolves into run away from the group and smack them, or activate enemy and then run the fuck away and then deal with them, right? And that's part of the problem, is a lot of encounters boil down to that. right? Like a lot of encounters boil down to that simple sort of deal with the problem and then back away and then repeat it. It's the same type of problem that makes the gameplay very boring by the end, because you're just doing the same shit over and over and over when you're dealing with encounters with a lot of enemies in them, or with enemies that activate slowly over time, or ambushes and stuff like that. It's like you bait them out and then you back up because there's more ambushes coming, or you slap the horde and back away because there are more enemies to deal with. And because a lot of the encounters are built off of those two principles in the two games, in Dark Souls 2 and Scholar, a lot of the encounters boil down to the same strategy to deal with those threats, right? And that makes the encounters take longer. Granted, you survive them, which is a big, yeah, I survived them, but it doesn't make them engaging when the strategy essentially stays the same on repeat playthroughs of, do the same thing that you've done throughout the rest of the game, but just do it more because there are more enemies, right? And this is one thing where the previous games did really well in their encounters, where they had it where if you jump into an encounter, you might have a couple of enemies, but they're not going to keep the encounter just going by adding more and more and more enemies most of the time. Now, there are small exceptions to that, like the baby skeletons right before Nito infinitely respawn, but they're baby skeletons, right? They're tiny, they're slow, they do a little bit of damage, but they're not the main threat of that area. The pinwheels are. Right, and the pinwheels go down and they stay down, and they're all there. They don't continue to trickle in more pinwheels. It's just that kind of that design philosophy impacted Dark Souls 2 very negatively when enemies just keep coming, right? And when you fight the same encounters over and over and over. Anyway, I've been talking for a while. I need some water. Oy. I need to catch up on chat. I apologize. Okay, where were we at? Honestly, I think Iron Keep is more manageable than the previous area. The assassin's puppets were scary. They were. Get good, Vangaris. You need to pay attention to something you would have no way of expecting or seeing on the first playthrough. Yes, and that's part of the problem with DS2 is on the first playthrough, you don't see what's coming, so you get ganked or ambushed, sometimes a combination of the two. On your second playthrough, you know it's coming, so you take longer to deal with the encounter via cheap method like aggroing and then running away, or maybe spamming like poison or something, right? Like I spam poison regularly on my DS2 runs just because you can get the poison arrows and they work wonders against most enemies in the game. It's but that shouldn't be your go-to to getting out of a situation. See, those little dudes are the only enemy I hate in the entire game. DLCs included. The mannequins suck. Yeah. What do you define as a gank? I define a gank as a group of enemies that can overpower you and basically stun lock you to death. That's pretty much what I would define as a gank. Pretty much. Just because a gank can be different things. Like a good example in Dark Souls 2 is the grave robbers, right? Or whatever you call the 3-boss combo in the Sunken Temple DLC. That's a good example of a gank, because all 3 of them can attack you and stun you unless you've got super high poise. And even then, I think the Havel is pretty much guaranteed to stun you, if he hits you. Right. They do enough damage where they can gank you, where you basically don't have an opening to get out of it if they all hit you at once, right? Or if they all hit you in quick succession. And ganks sort of follow that through line where you don't have an opening to get out of the gank, right? And that's pretty much why ganks are annoying, is because you basically sit there while the game juggles your player. It's similar to just getting comboed by an enemy, right? Where the enemy just combos you to death. But instead of the difficulty coming from a particular combo, it's coming from multiple enemies, locking you in place and just smacking you to death, pretty much. And sometimes they don't stun lock you completely, but the idea is that they just gank you because they're basically enemies that surround you, where you don't really have an opportunity to get away from them, and they kill you because of that. And I've dealt with that in every game. So it's not a problem that's specifically just to Dark Souls 2. It's a problem in different games, or various games, I should say. But Dark Souls 2 has a serious problem where they do a lot more of it. Stop going after the archers. In other words, boringly kite the enemies away from the archer, pick them off, then go after the archer. I mean, pretty much. Unbeatable sheep. Yeah, their claws combos were nasty. The one room with the raising platform killed me many times. You get touched, and that's surely it for the mannequins. Okay. To be fair to the blue smelter demon path, it was designed with co-op in mind. You don't miss out on a lot if you completely ignore this area. You don't miss a lot, but just because an area is designed for co-op doesn't, like, these games are majorly single player built, right? And so making things designed for co-op, I think, impacts the way the encounters change, right? And this is something that Elden Ring doesn't really seem to know how to deal with stuff like that, right? Like, Elden Ring has taken a lot of things from Dark Souls 2 on the spammy side, where they have a lot of enemies in an area, and the justification for doing that is that you have summons, you have friends that can help you. It's like, while you have added more things in the player's favor to help deal with it, you have still made the encounter a giant slap fest between all the different enemies and you and your friends, right? You've not really made the encounter better as much as you just made it more more overly complicated, because you've added a whole bunch of extra enemies that will slap each other, whether in your favor or against you, right? You've not really made the encounter better. You've just made it more. You've just added more enemies to the pile, like more friends and enemies to the pile, right? There's still a lot of enemies to deal with, and you can still get ganked, right? It doesn't really change the fact that you've still got a bunch of enemies that the player has to overcome. Like, just because you have friends doesn't mean you've dealt with the problem. The problem still exists. You can just deal with the problem now. Again, I made this point in my Dark Souls 2 video. Dark Souls 2 creates a lot of problems and also creates the solutions to those problems, but the problem didn't need to exist in the first place. And there's a lot of examples of that. You know, like a lot of the boss gauntlets to a lot of the bosses in the DLC of Dark Souls 2 have that, where you have several summons available. That still doesn't change the fact that there are several enemies that will try to gank you and attack you, right? Like, on your way to the boss, right? That doesn't change the encounter. Like, that doesn't fix the problem. It just gives you a way to deal with the problem. The problem still exists, right? And that's my sort of biggest complaint about a lot of the boss gauntlets in the DLCs of Dark Souls 2, is that just because they're built for co-op in mind doesn't mean that you fix the problem of so many enemies dealing with you at once. You know, if anything, you've just given the players an out for a problem you created that didn't need to be there. All right. True, but at that point, I wish those co-op areas had an effect that enabled you to summon NPCs without being human. That's a thing I would partially agree with. Except if you want the blue smelter demon sword. Yep. I shouldn't be punished if I want to run solo and do all the content, in my opinion, and I agree with that. Understandable, but I like the idea of a co-op focused zone. Haha, I remember being pissed after beating the 3 mercenaries in Sunken Crown DLC just for a flower skirt. Yeah, those were not fun. I was stubborn on my first playthrough, lol. I didn't want to summon real players, so I kept chugging effigies. Yeah, there's a lot of yeah, it's just you know, making an encounter that's designed for multiple friends to deal with multiple enemies, to me, doesn't play to the series' strengths. You know, I think this series does its best when it's a one-on-one encounter, right? Or at the very least, if there are multiple enemies, the enemies are balanced in a way where they don't just spam you with the same attacks over and over, where you don't get an opening, right? Like, 2 good examples of what I'm talking about here. The Ornstein and Smo fight is a good difficulty spike, but is also still very fair because the enemies fight very differently. Smo is very slow and lumbering, so he has a long wind-up for a lot of his attacks. Ornstein's a bit faster, right? But he'll zip away from you several times, right? So you can lead one of them away from the other might back off, and the movesets are balanced where they can hit differently and be challenging, but there are still openings given the fact that they fight so differently, right? A good opposite version of that is problematic is the Godskin duo in Elden Ring, right? Where you fight the 2 of them at the same time, you know, and they both have large AoE attacks that can cover a large bit of the arena. They both have significantly long combos. They both have high damaging and HP draining over time flame attacks, you know, on top of the big roly-poly being able to roll and cancel his roll and then immediately go back into his roll, right, which can catch you out while you're trying to do anything. You know, it's just you've not overstaffed. you've overstuffed those two enemies with the same types of moves that are both quick, aggressive, and hard hitting over a large area, which makes that encounter very annoying because you're basically picking and choosing, okay, which annoying thing do I want to deal with less of? And so you go deal with the thing that's less annoying, right? Whichever one that happens to be, depending on your build, right? And you've got build problems with various builds not being able to deal with some of those encounters without having significant issues. Again, putting a summon next to it doesn't fix the problem with the Godskin Duo. Same thing here. Like, not just because you have summons doesn't mean it fixes the problem. If anything, it just makes the encounter more chaotic.
Probably, just listen to is don't go after the archers. Kill the enemies before you go towards the archers, because what ends up happening is the archers have a shit ton of guards near them, just like real life. As it turns out, it's a good idea to put guards near your archers. So you can see a lot of the.
This is one thing too. He is not dodging at all, and I think it's because he knows that ADP makes dodging shit if you don't level it up. Like him just tanking damage there instead of dodging makes me feel like he's avoiding dodging purposely because he knows ADP is a problem. Especially since he said he didn't level it up. Right? Like I think he's aware of the criticisms of the game, so he's doing his best to skirt around the criticisms of how ADP works.
These particular ganks that people.
It also doesn't help that his the way he's saying everything comes across as like he's got an evil grin and he can't contain his excitement at owning the chuds, Like it feels like he's making this video as sort of a gotcha more so than having like an argument with points. Like he's doing it for the thrill of owning the people that don't like Dark Souls 2.
People like to point out, they're not actually ganks at all. They're ambushes. The players who get.
There's a significant overlap in ganks and ambushes. Yes, they are fundamentally different, but a lot of times they are overlapping.
Stuck in this are running way too fast through the game or trying to be aggressive with the game.
Yeah, notice how the guy in the back does not move forward until you step on the bridge. Yeah, so now we have a fourth guy to add to this encounter with two other guys behind us that are supposed to ambush us. You have crowded us on a small platform above lava. This does not help your point. That's why I say that this is the worst kind of person to defend DS2. That obnoxious, smug tone is grating to try and take seriously. Yes. Now, granted, I think a little smugness can be charming in a way. But when he's just going, don't go for the archers, damn it, you're just playing the game wrong, you retards. It comes across as like, dude, you're trying way too hard. Take a chill pill, have a glass of water, breathe. Like, chill out, dude.
And every single mechanic in Dark Souls 2 is pointing to you being less aggressive. You can just give an example, right? Dark Souls 1, if you get stuck in a corner, you know what you can do? You can save and quit out. Enemy.
What? What kind of point is that? Yeah, if he was going for some comedy and teasing, I could enjoy it, but you can tell he's 100% serious. Yeah. It's like they're the like the people that defend like this, they're the Rise of Skywalker meme guy, right? You ever see him where it's the guy that cries at every trailer, thinking every trailer is beautiful. It's those people that are so unaware of how they appear in their sort of like shillness, that they, that they just come across as a meme, right? And he's kind of acting like a meme in this video. But let's go back to this point he's making because it's going to be fun to dismantle this.
Less aggressive. You can just give an example, right? Dark Souls 1, if you get stuck in a corner, you know what you can do? You can save and quit out. Enemy positions get reset completely. You don't have to worry about it. And if you decide to run towards the fog gate to, get to the boss quicker, right? You get iframes on it. So realistically speaking, what decision are you making when you decide to run towards the boss room? There's not.
What the hell was that point? It's like you can quit out and completely cheese the game. It's like, okay, you can do that in all the games. It's kind of a problem with the games, actually, that you can quit out and reset everything. It's a problem they don't really fix. I mean, How does that help your point?
Have to worry about it. And if you decide to run towards the fog gate to, get to the boss quicker, right? You get iframes on it. So realistically speaking, what decision are you making when you decide to run towards the boss room?
Well, I would say that if you're running past enemies, the idea is get into an arena where the enemies can't follow, like many speedrunners do, like many players do when they just don't want to deal with enemies. They just run past them, get to the next checkpoint where there are either iframes or a bonfire or something, and then they move on. It's like like you said, I'm deciding to do the boss fight because I've proven I can handle the area. It's like it's not that hard. I wonder what he's going to say because I paused it right before he says it, but we'll see what he says in a minute. It's definitely an issue, but after that first time reaching the boss, I want to be there. I want to do the boss now. Yeah. Let's see what he thinks when he's thinking about running to a boss door.
There's not that big of a decision because every single choice that you could make is in the benefit of you running towards the boss room. You get more Estus for the boss itself. You don't have to deal with the enemies.
Wait, what? Is he? This is the thing where he's not giving a context, right? Like, let me back that up, just so I can get like the full sort of thing.
When you decide to run towards the boss room, there's not that big of a decision because every single choice that you could make is in the benefit of you running towards the boss room. You get more Estus for the boss itself. You don't have to deal with the enemies. If you get caught, you can save and quit out. And if you get to the fog gate, guess what? You get iframes.
So he made all those points right for running. Like so he's talking about running to the boss and ignoring enemies, right? It's a thing where you still have to account for the enemies. Like you still deal with the enemies in some way. You don't completely like get to skip past them, right? Sometimes you can, just because the enemies are, either really slow or they don't attack. They're not super aggressive, right? But he's kind of making a point where if you want to get past them and get the boss door, you can, and you can cheese it through all the extra mechanical things that the developers haven't changed because for some reason they just like people being able to reset enemies on quit out and reload, or maybe they just don't know about it, which I think would be hard to not notice considering that they've had games do this for like 15 years at this point. I think Demon Souls did it, so like they should be aware of this shit, right? It's just very odd. Very odd it's very odd that he's bringing this up as a point in his favor. It's like you can run past enemies in all the games. You can get through the fog wall in all the games. If your ADP is working correctly, you can get iframes for getting past enemies through all the game. Like this is not a point in Dark Souls 2's favor that you're bringing all this shit up. This is just pointing out that, yeah, you can do this, and all the games have these benefits and problems depending on how you look at it. Like this is a pretty even split amongst all the games where you can do all this shit in all the games. I'm making a 3 ADP run at the moment. Makes me more careful on positioning and use the bow more often. I mean, that's true. Like ADP as a stat impacts the way you play the game as a Souls game. And this is one point that I brought up several times in various things that I've posted is if Dark Souls 2 was the first game in the series, right? If it wasn't called Dark Souls 2, like if Dark Souls 2 was Demon Souls, for example, right? And then Demon Souls came out after it. Or let's just say this was named Bearer of the Curse, right? And this was the first game they made in this style, right? I would not have nearly as many problems with this series, with this game, as I do now, right? The problems are because it should have known better, right? It should have done better. It should have been better, right? It had all the design philosophy of Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1, right? So it's not a fluke where they just got everything right in one go. No, they got a lot of things right in 2 goes, right? There's a consistency with that. And then they continue that stuff in Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne and Elden Ring, where they continue to use a lot of good ideas there, right? Now they made some mistakes here and there in each game as well. Like none of the games are perfect, and they've made, they've had slip ups throughout every single game, right? I'm not holding this against any particular game, but they should have been able to do better than what Dark Souls 2 offered, right? And that's part of the problem is that they should have not handed this off to a different team. They should have just waited until Bloodborne was done, then made Dark Souls 2, and for all we know, we could have gotten something akin to Dark Souls 3, but with all the Dark Souls 2 assets, which I think would have been awesome, right? Imagine having 42 bosses that are on the level of like a Dark Souls 3 boss, right? With multiple phases, with like really intricate move sets. Imagine that game. And then imagine what Dark Souls 3 would have been after that, right? Like that would have been really awesome. But instead they gave it to a totally different team who obviously had a fundamental difference of opinion on how the Souls game should work, right? That's part of the problem. All right. That sounds like the play, Borin. You may want dodging to be the last resort or no resort at all if you can manage it. That's true. You still need to get past them with good/full HP. Otherwise, you'll end up needing to heal as soon as you enter the boss arena. Yeah, and that's also another problem is that some enemies have a wide enough attack where they can hit you after you've entered the boss arena. So sometimes you can die in the boss arena just because enemies hit you through shit, right? So I mean, these again, this doesn't help his point. But I'm curious what he's about to say about Dark Souls 2, because it sounds like he's said all this about Dark Souls 1 as a lead up to saying something that Dark Souls 2 does differently.
Dark Souls 2 is telling you, hey, no, if you want to take the risk to go towards the boss gate, you have to take a risk. There is no, oh, you can just save and quit out. Dark Souls 2 will actually save the positions of the enemies.
Does it? I thought you could quit out and reset them. I don't know. I'm not. I don't really save and quit out a lot of times unless like something's like fucked up, like an enemy glitches or an item glitches or something. So I don't know. But this is also a point. This is also a point. You can get past all the enemies in the previous games up to this point by just dodging them. In here, you have to level up a stat, which is an extra requirement, and then you have to deal with multiple enemies in tight spaces, like he showed here on this bridge, with the enemy behind the archer, the two enemies in front of the archer, and the archer itself. Right? This encounter is way more difficult, right? But you can still deal with it, right? But it is more difficult because they stuff the areas with enemies that are in the way, right? It's like the only thing that's really changed is that you have to level up a stat to get the appropriate level of iframes, and you have to deal with more enemies this time around. The system is largely the same. You've just added extra layers or extra steps to the process. Nope, they save the positions. If I have to do something, I save and quit out, but I've been killed immediately upon entering the game again. Yeah, well, that's one thing I would give to Dark Souls 2 then. They fixed that, and then no other game kept it. So, damn. Damn.
And of course, Dark Souls 2 took out the iframes for the fog gate, except for when you actually start to walk through it. There is still iframes for that. So it's that initial portion where your hand is on the fog gate itself, where you don't have any iframes. Because again, the game is trying to tell you, no, you can't just run to the fog gate. You have to engage the game that we created.
And this is one thing too about he's going on and on and on about the game telling you things. Unless the game explicitly like gives you a note or a tutorial about things, the game's not really telling you anything. This all comes down to like inference, like what do you infer from what you experience, right? And this is one thing where guidance in games is very complicated, very subjective. It's very dependent on what the intention was, the developers specifically say, what they did in the product, and what the player's reaction to it is, right? Because sometimes guidance doesn't work because the guidance is shit, right? And sometimes the guidance can work really well and seamlessly, right? Like a point that you could talk about with Dark Souls 1 in terms of guidance is in the Undead Burg, very early on in the game. When you go through the Undead Burg, if you take the pathway to the right, right before the first bonfire in Undead Burg, right? You kill the two spear guys, you go down there, talk to the vendor, then you go down that side passage, you kill the dude that's hiding behind the like shelf or whatever. Then you deal with the little hollows right before a ladder. Then you climb up the ladder, you loot the humanity, and then you drop back down to where you initially enter the Undead Burg from, right? The game has subtly told you that there are looping passages that will allow you to deal with more enemies. You might find traders, you might find extra loot, and it will end up looping you back around to where the main pathway anyway, right? That has subtly told you that. Now, whether that was intentional as guidance from the developers, that's one thing, right? But what you experience is that, oh, there are pathways that will loop around. Just on an objective level, pathways will loop around, which will get me back on the main path. Okay, I know that now. That might be helpful later on, right? But what he's talking about is developers specifically telling you to slow down, which is something that you could make an argument for or against completely subjectively, right? It's not really based off of a lot of points as much as there's more shit to deal with before you get to the fog wall, right? There's more shit to deal with before you can actually run past enemies and get to the boss, right? There's more shit to deal with. Does that convey that the game wants you to play the game more by going through the encounters that they've put in between checkpoint and boss? Maybe, but it's not concrete, right? Like there's no specific thing saying, take your time, dipshit. It's like there's nothing explicitly stating to do things a certain way, right? And so like this whole like guidance thing he's bringing up is very interpretable depending on the person. And that's a problem when it comes to discussing this. Why even have iframes on the fog wall at all when the most critical time to give them is during the beginning, middle of the animation? Yeah, that's a good point. Is like, why even give them iframes like halfway through the animation? Like, why only do it during like halfway through it? Like why? Well, it's simple answer is make it harder, right? Just make it harder. A lot of changes in this game can be boiled down to just make it harder. Just make it harder.
Do it. Now, the second portion of Iron Keep, I don't understand how many people have played through this portion and have never utilized the trap doors. This is like the most.
I like how he's just assuming that nobody uses the trap doors and then immediately regrets it when they have these tiny, thin walkways to move around on afterwards, where a sniper can easily stun you off. I like how he doesn't even account for that at all. He's just like, why does nobody use this obvious thing? Which can also lead to more problems. Gee, I wonder why.
Most fun mechanic in this entire area. Why are you not using it? These traps are for you to use. The bullheads, they are for you to use to burn the ironclad knights alive.
No, they're environmental hazards that you can use against the enemies, true, but they can also be used against you too when you try to run away and you get tagged by a flame thing at the wrong time. These are just environmental hazards that you can use to your advantage. These are not specifically used to help you deal with the enemies. They are environmental hazards. They still hurt you. Also, would like to thank Aborin for being a mature DS2 fan. I'm always terrified that the next guy is going to be like the dude in the vid. Yes, we do. This is one thing. When you civilly talk about stuff, when you agree on different things, or you like, and you like when you're civil, you can talk about shit and you can agree to disagree, right? When you just come off as an asshole that won't take someone else's opinion, right? That's when you have problems. Yeah. Maldo never used the trapdoors in his videos. Well, I'd have to rewatch them again, but we're talking like a hard 10 hours of me scanning all the footage for him not doing the traps, and that's just too much work for too little payoff. But I mean, but it's the thing too, like I don't really use the traps at all in this area. I actually run past the enemies most of the time and then deal with the like sometimes I'll use the trap, sometimes I won't. It's very 50-50 for me. Depends on my mood. If I like, usually I don't even really deal with the enemies here. It's like I run past most of them, burn the turtle, and then go down the pathway because most of these enemies won't follow. At least in my experience. I also don't like dropping them because the archer on the ground over here will snipe at you, and he can knock you off into the lava if you're on one of these like tight little, like every time you drop one of these, an archer gets a new vantage point from which to shoot at you, right? That's part of the trade-off of this area, right? He's doing a disservice to this area as a whole, right? Because this encounter I actually kind of like. There are problems with it, but it's also a thing where like it's actually not terrible. Like it's got some pros and cons to it. I didn't either. I used the lava platform, which is fun to do, but it's not necessary or way better than just killing and running past these guys. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, like you can run past these guys.
That's what they're there for. The trapdoors are so you can drop people into lava.
Or yourself by accident, which is entirely possible. It's like these are traps that work for or against you. It's not intrinsically just a player thing.
The guillotine, right? That is for you to use against the Turtle Knight. And of course, in that corridor,
it's like how many people have used the guillotine where they could kill that turtle guy faster than if they just hit him with like another weapon? Like, I genuinely wonder what the time difference would be trying to set that up, aggro him, line that, like, hit the guillotine, aggro him, pull him back, and then time it right where it will come down on him. Because I've had plenty of times where it misses. Right? It's not consistently going to attack anything that's underneath it. I think it's on a timer. Right? And it's one of those things that can hurt you too. But I'd be curious to see the time difference in setting all that up versus just poking him with like some weapon or something.
If you decide to run through without paying attention, there's actually a Alone Knight behind you that waits, because there's one that drops in front of you and there's one that drops behind you.
Hey, look. Ambushes in tight spaces. Woo! Thanks, Sheep, and I'm glad you guys aren't mindless DS2's haters that just follow trends without even trying the game. Yeah. Well, I mean, I try to take things as they are, right? And this is the thing. I like playing Dark Souls 2. I got no problem playing Dark Souls 2. Just by From Software standards, it's probably the lowest one in terms of quality, just because of the problems that it has, right? And that's one thing is I enjoy playing DS2, a lot, right? This is a difference between my opinion versus what the game is, and I want to be reasonable with people, because if we can't be reasonable people with other people, then they have no incentive to be reasonable with us. And then we just end up with two parties just yelling at each other and not actually having a dialogue. Like, the whole point is having a dialogue and talking about it. He's really going out of his way to make Iron Keep look so rewarding. Yeah. Well, I hope he goes over Shrine of Amana, because Shrine of Amana has a special case of bullshit with the ranged attacks going from miles away. That's just a lot of bullshit just stacked on top of each other. The guillotine can be a bit tricky to time, yeah. Yeah, it's like, yeah, you can use the traps, but they can also cause problems if they don't work properly, right? Or if you don't use them at the right time, or if you use them inappropriately, I guess I should say.
But that drops later, because again, the game is making these ambushes particularly to catch out people who are not paying attention to their environment. The game is saying, look at the level design, utilize the level design. It is way more fun if you use it that way. A lot of
Utilize the level design as he fights a guy on a platform that you can't twist or turn any way to knock these guys into lava. It's like, this is not about the level design anymore. Like, your clip does not go with your point.
these quote unquote ganks are far easier when you utilize.
I didn't look to see if the enemies were falling down to gank me. Yeah, he didn't look, but you've also got two enemies in front of you, an enemy behind you, and the archer's gone. It's like, this shit is still a gank on a tight space that will probably kill you.
The level design to either cut down the enemies.
Look, he did the encounter and fucking died because of the gank. This does not help your point, dude. This does not. This is one thing that annoys me as well, is when they put footage behind their point that doesn't help their point. Oh boy. I do like to troll about the game, but DS2 is not terrible at all. If reviews balance the criticisms and the praises, we'd evolve. Yeah. That's the thing. Dark Souls 2 is not a bad game, like, on the whole. It's just, it's not up to par to what From Software typically gives us, or typically gave us at the time, right? Like if I had to give DS2 an honest rating of like good to bad, 1 to 10, which I don't generally like doing, but if I had to pick, I'd probably put it at like a lowest number, probably a 7, right? Lowest number will probably be a 7, like a good game that is fun, that will engage you for several hours, right? That is worth the price, right? Bare minimum, probably a 7, that's not a bad rating at all. Like, I don't hate the game. I don't think it's a bad game. It's bad by Soul standards, right? Or it's subpar by Soul standards is probably a better way to look at it. You didn't look, bro. So trash, get good. Pay attention to the enemies. It's like, yeah, I got ganked when I played like an idiot. It's like, okay.
Through traps, or use it so you can funnel enemies through and you can push people off. It's far easier and far better and a far more fun experience if you do it like that. Now, the second issue, Shrine of Amana. This is the one that everyone.
Here we go. It's time for the Amana madness.
what bitches and moans about. Jesus Christ, I have not heard the end of this. And you know what? When I went through this, I did it with the bow and arrow as well. So, I can't really complain. So I decided, hey, let's try to do this with just melee only, right? In fact, I even did the torch for this run because if you guys didn't know, the Shrine of Mana, if you bring a torch with you, you can actually see the edges of the level. So there are a lot of times where it's very hard to see where the edge of the level is, and you might fall to your death, right?
Here it is. He's skirting over one of the biggest issues with the area is it's hard to keep track of the holes that are nearly invisible, not completely invisible, nearly invisible, while the enemies are constantly coming at you from the water and spamming range spells at you. He is just going to completely undermine one of the biggest criticisms of this area. Like, if this whole area was flat and there were no holes, a lot of the problems for this area would be gone, right? Because that's a big one, right? When you have random death pits in an area, that's a big no-no. Like, especially when you're going to fill it with enemies and range attacks from really far away that you're going to be dodging pretty much constantly until the enemy's dead. Like, you need to, the holes are a big part of why this area sucks for a lot of people. Bitches and moans about this area. Such a terrible defense. He's completely heartless when it comes to player experience. I would agree. Just a simple, I completely understand the hate this place gets, but here's what can make it better for you would have gone a long way. Yeah, well, it's one of those things where acknowledging someone's different perspective does a lot for both their argument and your argument, right? It makes it seem like you're actually trying to have a discussion and talk through points and go through things. But this is one of those things where he's obviously the type of person that gets offended when someone doesn't like the thing he likes. Right? And that's a big problem with a lot of people across a lot of different franchises of different things. These are the people that fundamentally cannot handle other people's dissenting opinion. And I hate that, right? I hate that those people have to live a life where they are just self-gaslighted into hating people based on opinions that differ from their own. I truly feel sorry for people like that who just cannot just deal with other people's opinions. Like, it must be a horrible existence. Vanilla Shrine of Amana was literally Vietnam. The spell's range was even bigger. Yes. Yeah, that was... When you said that, it made me think of like people, like veterans having like war flashbacks, and I just had flashbacks of going through not Vietnam. I didn't go through Vietnam. Amana. I was thinking of it now. It's just that of the spells coming at you just over and over and over.
With just melee only, right? In fact, I even did the torch for this run because if you guys didn't know, the Shrine of Mana, if you bring a torch with you, you can actually see the edges of the level. So there are a lot of times where it's very hard to see where the edge of the level is, and you might fall to your death, right? If you have a torch, not a big problem. And in fact, the game encourages you to use torches because there are multiple areas or multiple places in that area where you can light the torch. So
yeah, let's again, Dark Souls 2, creating a problem and then giving a solution when the problem didn't need to be there. The torch helps you see the pits, right? But you also have to sacrifice a weapon slot or a shield slot or something, right? In order to use it. And then you've got the side of like, okay, the pits are still there, right? If the pits weren't there and you didn't need the torch, you could have the action encounter work as an action encounter instead of like a pseudo platforming problem where you have to stay away from the pits of death. It's just this area has a lot of things working against it as an idea, right? Like, having an enemy snipe you from far away is not a bad idea, right? And there are several encounters throughout various games where, you deal with that. The Orlando snipers are a good example of that, right? I forget what that machine's called in Demon Souls, where you basically have to get around it shooting like 3 waves of arrows and then reloading, kind of a thing. But those encounters have been done before and done well, where an enemy shoots you out of range and you can't deal with them for X, Y, or Z, right? Either because they're out of range or because something, right? Like, it's a game of sort of like dealing with the encounter. They can do it before. And like I said, if there were no death pits here, I would have significantly less problems with this area. Yeah, the enemies hitting you from really far away would have still been a problem, but at least you wouldn't fall into death pits, right? Like, when you're dodging something and you randomly fall into a death pit, that's one of those moments where you're just like, oh, fuck. Now you have to worry about pits, in which case they usually funnel you to dealing with the little enemies that are in the water instead of the casters who are continually spamming you. It's just it's a very annoying encounter in general, but getting rid of the death pits, I think, would go a long way towards easing some pain. I heard vanilla was way, way worse, and Dragon Area was worse than vanilla too. Shrine of Mana in vanilla, I think, was a little worse. Dragon Area, I'm a little unsure of because I forget. Yeah, Dragon Area is the first part of that Dragon Area, not the second part with the actual boss. Yeah, I think in Scholar, the Dragon Area was worse because I think there were a lot more enemies that would break your gear. Because in Vanilla, I don't remember them having a whole bunch of enemies that did that. I don't think they were there in Scholar. Or I think there were a couple in Vanilla, but I think they amped up the number of them in Scholar. But I can't remember off the top of my head. Isn't he such a badass? He's even using an infinite durability spear, ignoring the game's durability mechanics like a coward. Yeah. He's cheesing the game effectively. He's playing the game outside of the systems it wants you to play with. Yeah, Vanilla Dragon Area is horrible, like having to fight two big dudes in black armor, shield, and the Dragon Guards at the same time. Yeah, now, one thing I will say, though, is the Dragon Shrine in Scholar is way worse than Vanilla because of that final area right before the boss. All of those Dragon Guards attack you at once. All of them will attack you at once. I think unless you're in a particular covenant or something. If you haven't done a specific thing, all of those guys will attack you at once. And that's the ultimate Dark Souls fuck you gank fest. Those guys are strong, do a lot of damage, and there's 8 of them. And it's just holy shit. Thank God they showed Mercy. I haven't played Vanilla, but I know that dual wielder had been added. There's just a lot of shit. Anyway, let's get back into this.
I decided let's play this portion how the game developers intended. And
again, doing that intended thing.
How many times did I die? Once. I died once.
Hey, look, let's go back and watch that death.
Once. I died once.
Look at that, trying to heal. You got an enemy sneaking up behind you. You got an enemy still pelting you from range, and you've got another ambush over there if you try to go for that one. Seems like an area that's kind of overstuffed with difficulty, wouldn't you say?
And this is, okay, to be fair, I had a level 5 Santian Spear, one of the best weapons in the game. Well, quote-unquote best weapon in the game. It's just a very unique weapon. I like it. Plus, it's infinite durability, so it's very useful. But in this...
Again, he's doing that thing where, just because I have infinite spears, it's just besides the point. The fact of the matter that I'm using an infinite durability weapon, and the fact that I'm using a torch so I can see the edges of the massive death pits that are everywhere is completely fine. Completely fine. Does not belabor the point at all. This does not help my enemy's arguments whatsoever. Hey, dipshit, you should probably pay attention and not heal in the open. Again, yeah. Yeah.
This area, you should at least have a +7 or above weapon at this point. They've given you a lot of Titanite chunks, okay? So it's not particularly an excuse to say, oh, well, you had a fully upgraded weapon. Yes, you should have a fully upgraded weapon at this point. So why was it so easy for me? Well, you can see in the footage, you can just dodge the magic arrows. You don't need...
When you've got one person shooting at you.
Need to run. You don't need, or you do need to run. You don't need to dodge, right? You can just sidestep these magic missiles. It's very easy, very doable. In fact, you can use the terrain to block this stuff, and you can basically go through it. Nope.
Wait a minute. Let's get that text that pops up.
In fact, you can use the terrain to block this.
Notice how I missed this enemy in the back that would have caused. Dude, spell check yourself. Would have caused me a lot of problems. Well, this enemy is causing you lots of problems because you've got 3 of them sniping you, a couple little dudes, and the ogre. This combat encounter is not playing to the series' strengths with this shit.
this stuff, and you can basically go through it. Nope, easy peasy lemon squeezy.
Easy peasy lemon squeezy. As he's running away from a group and he gets tagged by 2 spells, you are not proving your point with this footage, my dude. You are showing how the encounter can lead to an annoying experience when you have to deal with 3 snipers, several dudes in the water, and then a giant ogre coming after you. You're not proving your point with this footage. If you rush or don't fight the duels with the black armor guys, the dragon guards will aggro you. When I first played Scholar, I was like, wow, they even bow to me. Nicest guys in the game. Lol. That's the thing. I'm not sure what triggers the dragon guard guys to aggro you in the end. I don't know what triggers them specifically. I just know that in vanilla, they had like pairs of them, and they were spaced out where you wouldn't aggro them all at once. I did like the area in Scholar, Dragon Airy. It felt like proper duels in the nights, testing my skill before I progress. I don't have a problem with the big black dudes. I do think they're supplemented by some enemies that are annoying, like the one guy that shoots little like explosive, like concussive blasts at you. That's kind of annoying when you're fighting them. It's like, but also they knock you down for a long time, which is really annoying as well. Like they knock you down for a solid several seconds, right? Which is also a problem. But anyway, back to this video. He's not really making his point with I don't have the problem with the big black dudes is wild out of context. Clip that, sheep. Clip that and put that everywhere. Hashtag go black. But yeah, let's get back to this video.
You just got to make sure that you're killing off all the wizards that are targeting you from the other side.
Hey, you notice how that little enemy was just as fast as he was while sprinting through the water using his stamina up? Again, the enemies get a lot of advantages here that the player does not.
There is a pathway in this level for you to utilize. Don't be dumb and just say, oh, you know what? I'm just going to run through it. You're going to die.
The funniest thing about this video, as he's getting psychotic about being, I'm right, damn it! You know, it's that kind of thing where he's completely assuming that everybody that has played the games and has problems with them are playing like an absolute fucking moron, which doesn't help. You know, it's like, why would you run through this area? Why would you run through it? Well, it's like the only reason for people to run through it after experiencing it once is to try to dodge everything because of dealing with the encounter. It's annoying as fuck to deal with these encounters in this area. You know, so you either take it really slow and abuse the AI, you know, and probably poison, or you run past it and try to dodge everything just to get past it, right? Dealing with it the way he's dealing with it is one way where it becomes very tedious when you have to smack the group of enemies that are following you everywhere while they're also sniping you, while some of them are also faster than you in the water. It's very annoying. It's a very tedious experience and very annoying with a high chance of death. That's probably just out of your hands because you'll be, you know, combo attacked to death by an enemy that has bleed, or you'll be multi-tapped by spells in the background. It's just overcompensation. It's just an overcompensation of different types of enemies and different hazards that impact the player negatively that you can't use against the enemies very well. I say very well because you can get enemies to fall into the pits, but you usually have to smack them in there unless the AI just breaks at the right moment.
And it's very funny how a lot of these people who love Dark Souls and says, you know, it's great if a game, you know, kills you over and over again to make you learn that what you're doing is wrong. But
again, he's just using all these straw. This is the funny. He's using the straw man arguments that a lot of people that DS2 use to defend it, right? A lot of the bad faith actors that defend DS2. He's using those arguments of people like him to criticize people that defend Dark Souls 1. And it's like, dude, why? I used to always try and force this area. It can work, but it's so difficult that you're better off playing it mind-numbingly slowly. Yes. I don't share that sentiment that he's putting up as a straw man. Yeah. Well, it's a thing where just because you die multiple times to a game doesn't necessarily mean that you're playing the game wrong. It means that you're not familiar with it, right? And that's part of the reason why second playthroughs of these games are really interesting is because you know where the shit is now, right? You know what's coming, and that impacts the difficulty in the long run, right? If you had a game that was, say, 2 hours long, and every 5 minutes you got an ambush that you couldn't see coming that would instantly kill you, and it took you forever to beat the game because of those things, right? Your second playthrough, you're going to know, or at least remember, where most of those are, so the game becomes much less challenging and intriguing that second time around, because you know at that point it's no longer surprise or difficulty, it's just timing and knowledge, right? And these games have something similar where there's a lot of difficulty that comes in the first run, but the second run is where you have time, where you know everything, and you get to really experience the game fully after you understand how things mechanically work. Killing me does not make a game great. I don't only care for difficulty. It's how the difficulty functions in the world and the experience. Yeah. Well, this is the thing that I think differentiates several games in the series is some of them go for difficulty, some of them go for a fair challenge, and sometimes those overlap, sometimes they don't. Dark Souls 2 is probably the most extreme case of going for difficulty, right? I'd say Elden Ring is probably close behind it. But there are several fair moments in Elden Ring too, but Elden Ring still has that problem of just like things just are difficult just because, and this is the thing. This is, again, it's the principles that we're, it's the principles that we're attacking here. We're not attacking the people behind the game. We're not attacking the way the game should have been. We're attacking the philosophy that the people had when making this game. Visions of Radon, lol. Yeah. But it's still that kind of point, right? Where, like the philosophy here is just fundamentally antithetical to the philosophy of the other games, where it's just hard for the sake of it. And the problem is that the developers of From Software, the A team, as it were, have started to give in to this philosophy of just make it harder. Just fuck it, make it harder. And that's part of the reason why I'm kind of giving up on the series after Elden Ring, right? Is just because I don't like the direction it's going with its difficulty. I think they're going for more difficulty than challenge, and I think that's going to fuck the series in the long run, and that's part of the reason why I'm tapping out after the DLC of Elden Ring. I'll still go back and I'll still enjoy Elden Ring and I'll still enjoy these games, but with the direction it's going, I don't look forward to their next project because I have a feeling I know where the difficulty is going to go. I just don't want to deal with that shit anymore.
But yet doesn't seem to understand that Dark Souls 2 is killing them over and over again because they're not utilizing the level design in order to make their lives easier. And, there are so many other points and places where the design element of just utilizing level design is very obvious. You have a boss where you can have it fall off the edge. You have
a boss that can knock you off the edge. Dipshit. Completely forgetting how the game can fuck the player over. How many people do you think were fighting him and got knocked off the edge by him? Probably a fair bit. And he's just completely sweeping it under the rug. It's not about what the player experiences. It's about what the player can do to bosses. It's like, yeah, you can bait him off, but if anything, that just makes the fight pitiful. Imagine if you took a great fight like Artorias, right? What if all you had to do was bring a bow in the arena, shoot it at a bell, and that instantly killed Artorias? Would that not make the fight incredibly underwhelming, knowing that you could do something as stupid as shoot a bell and Artorias died, right? It's the same principle here. Bait him to the edge, roll once, boss is dead. Does that not make the boss encounter worse? Right? A boss encounter is not about beating it, it's about the encounter itself. Is it engaging to fight the enemy? And here it's just one roll and the guy's dead. And that's if you get it right. That's the best case scenario is you roll once and the boss is instantly killed. What the fuck? I obsess over these videos of people giving up after or on Radon. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Yeah, well, I think that Radon fight is probably the last sort of vestige of From Software, like testing the waters of, like, should we repeat assets like this? We've done it a lot throughout this game. Some people had complaints of it. Let's see if they do it with a boss let's see what happens if we do it with a boss they liked before. And then a lot of people had complaints. So we'll see if they do something. Now, this is one thing. If the game after Elden Ring, I hear a lot of good things about it from people I trust, and it has a lot of the philosophy that I liked about their earlier games of difficult but fair, challenging but fair, then I might check it out. But after Radon, and actually it's not even really Radon, right? It's everything in Elden Ring was just kind of overcompensation, right? Everything was just crazy. And it's like, I'm probably just going to avoid the craziness in the future. I'd like to avoid the crazy. I'd like to avoid this content creator too. He gives me crazy fan vibes.
Obvious. You have a boss where you can have it fall off the edge. You have the pursuer where you can use the ballista to kill them.
I like how he's not showing this. It's like, for all I know, I could be making this up. I probably won't touch it even then. The fact that they felt comfortable even going that far shows that I'm left behind. This ain't for me going forwards. I mean, it's definitely one of those things where I think they're beginning to hit that brick wall where they need to reinvent the difficulty, you know, and I think they're reaching an end point where they can't really progress the series any farther in terms of new shit. It'll just be extensions of old shit, right? And I think that's going to be a big problem. Vanilla Radon or DLC Radon? I haven't got to either of these bosses in Elden Ring. We're talking about DLC Radon. They really overcompensate to make him hard, unless you have a very, very particular build. Very, very particular build. But anyway.
And even in the straightforward boss fights like the old Dragon Slayer and the Mirror Knight, you have these pillars that you can use to block attacks. In fact, with the old Dragon Slayer, you can use the pillars, but the pillars will break. So it's very clear that the game developers wanted you to utilize that, but only for a small amount of attacks. Again, a lot of the people who really love Dark Souls seem to miss all of the level design gimmicks that Dark Souls had. The Iron Golem, just like with the Dragon Slayer, you can have it fall off.
This is nothing like the Iron... Dude, oh my god, dude, fuck you. This is the thing where he's taking like the very bare bonus ideas of the encounters in Dark Souls 1, applying it to Dark Souls 2 and saying, why don't you love it when you're completely missing the context of it? Bruh, okay. Come on, guys. Is anyone doing this? Is anyone using the pillars to slow Ornstein down? That's one thing I got to ask, too. You have to be in a position where Ornstein's blast will hit the pillar. 2, you have to position him in that way when you're much better off to fight in the middle of the arena where you can dodge effectively, right? And then he brings up this example where it's like, in order to get the Iron Golem to fall off the edge, you have to A, position him, B, beat him down in that position, and C, get enough poise damage across to knock him off the edge. This is nothing like Dragon Rider, where you come into the arena, wait a couple seconds, roll once, and he's dead, right? Dragon Rider kills himself in DS2, okay? He needs to be on suicide watch. We need to send some flowers to Dragon Rider. He needs some mental help, okay? Iron Golem's just trying to do shit, and you knock him over. That's the difference. The boss is retarded in DS2. The Iron Golem is not. No problem for spoilers. I've seen it. Griffith hugging Radon. What a vision. Yeah. And here we are. Anyway, I need to get to this video. One, because I got to pee. Also, I'm hungry. But just this guy is not doing a good job of making points.
It's purposeful. It's made that way. With Ornstein and Smo, you can use the pillars to separate the two bosses. It's designed that way. In fact, a lot of people seem to miss that the reason why Dark Souls 1 is as fun as it is because of level design. If you actually look at the mechanics of Dark Souls 1, it is very bare bones. It is very straightforward. The enemies are simple. The bosses are simple. But the reason why it's very interesting to play through is because the level design is very interesting. Look, if you played through Dark Souls 1, I assure you, you remember the Silver Knight Bridge because it was so fucking annoying, but it was interesting. Just
the Silver Knight Bridge? What's he talking about here? I don't... Silver Knight Bridge. I'm drawing a blank on what he's talking about here with the Silver Knight Bridge. Can one of you help me out? I don't get what he's talking about. The only reason people love DS1 so much is the level design. Sorry, Guinevere. Sorry, Solaire. Sorry, Sif. Sorry, characters and lore. And also some good boss fights. we don't give a fuck about you guys, I guess. Yeah. I don't know what he's talking about with the Silver Knight thing, so I'm just going to move on.
It's like how you remember Sen's Fortress, because it was annoying, but it was interesting.
It was annoying, but it was interesting. Is he going to go with the perspective that Dark Souls 2 is annoying but interesting? I could see it.
The game changed up not the enemies, but the level. It said, hey, you want to play against this, snake guy? You did it already 4 times before in a normal room. What happens if you add in a giant swinging pendulum blade? That's interesting. What happens if you try to do it on a tiny ledge? Why would you do that to me? But that's interesting. Ultimately, a lot of the fault of these critiques lie with the critic themselves, because again, they're not trying to engage with Dark Souls 2 in the way that Dark Souls 2 is asking them to do. What they're doing is they're saying, okay, I played Dark Souls 1 with a light roll build, and I'm going to try to do Dark Souls 2 just like that. It's like,
which you can do. This is the whole thing about his argument, is like a lot of the things that you're saying, you can play Dark Souls 2 like Dark Souls 1 and get through it. The only like caveat to that is that you have more healing items and you have a stat to level up, so you get a consistent rolling animation that gives you iframes. Archers and Orlando, I guess, maybe, I don't know. You know, this guy loved that section because it was interesting to get knocked to your death. Yeah. He's just, there's a lot of projection here too.
Everyone thinks that the light weapon build of Dark Souls 1 is the definitive Dark Souls experience.
Wait, light roll, light weapon? What kind of build is that? That's like a glass butter knife build. Are you talking about a light roll heavy weapon? I think is what he meant to say. But that's just funny that he said light load, light weapon. It's like the that's gonna be a build now, butter knife build.
Without understanding that, no, the game was definitely designed around every single weapon class, every single role type. Primarily because if you didn't know, Dark Souls 1 and 2 have a particularly strong lean towards you sidestepping enemies. It's not really about the dodging.
I mean, this is technically a dodge. This is not a like functional mechanical like action that the player takes to dodge. This is more of just a I have moved out of the line that the enemy is going in. The first 2 games didn't have enemies that were fast enough to catch you moving backwards. I mean, several of them did. I mean, look at several of the bosses, they did. I mean, you can't move backward in Sif's arena. You can't move back out of the attack in well, I say this. If you're in the position where the enemy starts the attack, you rolling back is not you walking backward is not going to be fast enough to get you out of the range of Sif, Calamite, fuck, what's the other dragon? Other dragon. Seath. I get Sif and Seath mixed up. Too many like sounds and S's. But like there are some enemies and encounters and bosses that you can backstep away from out of the reach, but a lot of them don't have that either, right? Like this is the thing where you need dodging to roll, you need dodging to work accordingly. And again, this is where ADP makes Dark Souls 2 massively unfair. Like, and this is part of the problem with this is the problem with ADP in general. It's just that people were not told that ADP affects rolling, right? So you're going into a series where you expect to have a consistent roll. And then when people realize that the roll's not working, they might read into the stats and maybe guess ADP gives them it based on the description, but it's a lot of guesswork, right? Whereas in the other games, you hit space, you roll, right? And it's consistent, right? You don't imagine a stat would affect your dodge, right, in a Souls game at this point because you've had 2 games where the rolling is consistent. And ADP impacts the dodging.
It's more about your positioning that's far more important. But yeah, that's my just general criticism of all the critiques about Dark Souls 2. There are some more specific things like the Feeble King. He said a lot of things about, Dark Souls 2 has very Skyrim-like combat because you have infinite healing items, without acknowledging that it takes time to utilize those healing items. You're very vulnerable.
It seems like the only people he's seen criticize Dark Souls 2 are the brain dead retards that didn't like Dark Souls 2, right? Like it seems like we're delving into bottom of the barrel for both people that like Dark Souls 2 and people that don't like Dark Souls 2 in this video. It's like watching a crab and a snail fight when like two humans are looking down on them that disagree, and are taking the sides of each of them. But it's like, guys, you got to do better. It's like you got to do better
during that time, and it's a risk to use it. Unlike in Skyrim, where healing is immediate, there's no risk to healing other than the fact that you might run out of items, and that's it. It's not the same. It's not even remotely the same. I know.
Again, he's picking like the dumbest fucking arguments against Dark Souls 2 here.
Why he's saying it, because he's trying to say that because there's this aspect of having infinite health in Dark Souls 2, you don't have to engage in the combat as much as, say, in Dark Souls 1, making it feel like Skyrim. However, again, this is a complete false equivalency. They are not the same.
This is the one thing, is like comparing Skyrim to Dark Souls 2 in terms of the healing is a bad comparison, but the comparison should be Dark Souls 2 to Dark Souls 1, right? You have a lot more healing in Dark Souls 2, which makes a lot of the encounters a bit less. This is the thing. Dark Souls 2 is very difficult in a very one-dimensional way. That's why upon replaying all the series very close together, I consider Dark Souls 2 to be the easiest once you know what you're doing, right? The other games actually have consistent challenge. In Dark Souls 2, if you can stack up to 99 life gems by the time you complete an area, right? Like, it's not hard to do, right? You honestly don't have to put that much effort into getting 99 life gems, which will help you blitz a lot of other shit in the game, because you can trade hits however much you want. You will still have a lot of life gems available, right? The only exceptions would be extreme circumstances where the enemy hits you ridiculously hard, right? You completely negate enemy encounters unless the situations are extreme, then go into a boss fight with full Estus and 70 life gems as well. Yeah. Well, this is one thing too, is life gems heal just as much as Estus in the early game, right? So life gems are going to carry you through most of the early game, and your Estus are really only going to be when you need a quick heal, right? Like, just Estus, it's just like the life gems give you so much extra healing that attrition is no longer an issue unless you're just really bad with like the game, right? You have to be uniquely bad to not beat Dark Souls 2 while having all the life gems available. True, Feeble King's video on DS2 were bad. The Xander dude ones weren't that great either. Yeah, well, I'm sure that there are plenty of people that attack Dark Souls 2 and use the stupidest attacks imaginable with the dumbest comparisons. I mean, he mentioned one that is dumb that I will give to him. It's like, yeah, that's an absolutely stupid reason, but we're talking about like a 1 IQ person getting dunked on by like a 2 IQ person, and the rest of us normal people are like way up here in like the hundreds being like, dude, these are some really bad arguments on both sides. It's like, holy shit. Feeble King's videos are too dramatic, and he ends up changing his opinion multiple times, and I just don't take it seriously. I never watched any of his videos or her videos. I would assume it's a he just because it's a king. But, yeah, it's just one of those things about bad arguments. Bloodborne is better at blood level 4. Yeah, let's try that. Anyway, let's wrap this video up.
Can't just spam soul gems until you are okay. If you want to try it, you can. I'm going to let you know it's not going to be a good solution for you. You're going to die repeatedly. Unlike in Skyrim, where even with if you have all the health potions in the world, there is no challenge unless you get one-shotted, because you can just get hit, drink potion, get hit, drink potion. And again, there is no delay. Which just the delay by itself is a big enough difference where it's not the same thing. But yeah.
Wow, he's replaying the clip where he died. He's replaying the clip where he died, where we get the full context of He blatantly tries to heal in front of a group of enemies that are attacking him right now.
Hit, drink potion, and again, there is no delay.
Look at that. Like there,
Which
like
that
two enemies
just the
and
delay
a
by
ranged,
itself is
2 enemies and a ranged attack are hitting him, and he's like, "I'm gonna heal right in front of him." It's like, dude, why do you play badly? It's like you're purposely playing badly.
it's a big enough difference where it's not the same thing. But yeah, that's it. I just want to talk about Dark Souls 2. I love Dark Souls 2. There's a lot of weird and fun things about Dark Souls 2. It's also the only Dark Souls game where New Game Plus actually changes things. And it's also the only Dark Souls game where you have weird fucking weapons.
I like how he's saying these things, and it's like, you can point to several changes in Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls for some of the stuff. It's like, New Game Plus significantly changes on the bare bones aspect of enemies' health and damage are increased. Right? It's like, come on, dude. Like, the heal positioning is wild. Yes. Oh, man. It's just like, wow, dude. Wow.
And then it's also the only game where you have a scavenger hunt when it comes to random moths all over the place, as well as hidden hollows. If you didn't know this, there are absolutely hidden hollows all over the place that you can only find by using the torch and noticing that the hollows have a shadow in the torch. It's really weird. I highly recommend that you guys watch Limit Break's Dark Souls 2 videos in regards to all the weird thing that Dark Souls 2 has done and the New Game Plus just by itself, because there's a lot of lore inside of the New Game Plus. And
this is one thing, too. You don't love Dark Souls 2, you'll shill for it, and that's completely unhealthy. You're not healthy for the game and changes moving forward. I would agree. This is one thing, too, right, about some of the stuff that he was saying back there, right, is it's funny how Dark Souls 2 does all this weird shit but can't get the basics right. It's like all this effort went into making like invisible hollows and weird gimmicks, having the torch be a thing, all these like weird mechanics that were experiments. And then they fundamentally fuck up the game philosophy of the combat and the dodging, right? And they don't get the level design right in places. It's like there are so many basic things that you should have gotten right before all this niche shit, but instead they got all this niche shit in there instead. It's like, come on. Why Dark Souls New Game Plus is the best gives me such a headache, man. Play it. Play New Game Plus. I doubt these people are actually playing New Game Plus to see a DS2 adding more enemies, painting pre-existing enemies red, adding red phantoms. He's right on New Game Plus, but I don't think people care about hidden hollows or moths. Well, yeah, like if I remember correctly, I think the moths only lead you to get like an item set where you just radiate poison, which, while neat as a gimmick, that doesn't change everything else in the game. It's like you get a unique item to wear. Whoop-de-doo. Like, it doesn't change anything. Like, the niche little things in the game don't make up for the fact that the core gameplay has been fucked up by the ADP affecting iframes. The amount of enemies that you deal with in specific encounters being radically raised just to make it harder. And then you've got different shit built to kill you, like insta-kills that are guaranteed to pretty much kill you unless you've dumped all your levels into health, right? With like mimics and traps and other shit, right? Like the game is built to kill you, not challenge you. It's built to kill you, right? And that's the difference between a challenge and killing you, right? That's the difference between a challenge and difficulty. Difficulty is just trying to kill you however it can. And it's got a bunch of ways to kill it that the other games did not have. Or at least not to the same amount. New Game Plus is the most creative of them all, though, with a different philosophy and changing encounters in a better manner. It would clear. I mean, this is one thing I will give Dark Souls 2 is the New Game Plus for Dark Souls 2 is the most interesting compared to the base game. Now, granted, you have enemies with absurdly high health bars everywhere now, but on the face of it, and in practice and in general, like Dark Souls 2's New Game Plus is more interesting than the other games, but purely based on the extra content they added in New Game Plus. Now, one of the only exceptions to that would probably be Dark Souls 3, just because you get like some items in New Game Plus that are very unique. Not even a set. Well, you get the set whether or not you killed the moths. You just need to be a New Game Plus 2. Oh, yeah. See, that's the thing is like it's so niche that I haven't even like figured it out. I probably did it like once and then forgot about it. I mean, again, there's just a lot of stuff in Dark Souls 2 that's really niche, but like the core combat and the engagement that keeps people around was messed up. But anyway, let's finish this video because I really have to pee and I need to go.
Really, it's just interesting. I really wish Dark Souls 2 was more beloved because a lot of the ideas that it had were actually amazing. And it's really sad to see a lot of these good ideas go to waste because a lot of dumbass people don't seem to understand that the game was actually perfectly fine. Even Scholar of the First Sin, I think, is 100% okay. I don't understand why people think that it's really Ganky without realizing, hey, maybe the game is telling you to stop running in, and maybe they're not ganks at all. Maybe you're getting ambushed. Because if you played through Dark Souls 1, there's a lot of times where you get thrown 3 enemies at a time. I guess that game was Ganky too, right? No. Obviously not. People don't have the same kind of ideas because, again, they have a hate boner for Dark Souls 2 because they died over and over again because they were dumb.
That ending, man, that ending, holy shit. He basically just went out and said, maybe all these people are dumb because they have a hate boner. It's like, dude, I think you're the one with the hate boner. Like, you hate people that dislike your game. Like, it's just like, holy shit. Oh, he was not. He was one of those people that, you know, you see in a debate club who is just an absolute prick. And he's wrong about a lot of things, but he thinks he's right. I really wish Dark Souls 2 was more beloved. Well, let me tell you, the way you shat on people who don't like it isn't winning favors. Exactly. I may just leave a comment on that video, just a calm critique. I mean, you could just leave a link to this stream. That'd be hilarious. But anyway, I'm sweating my balls off right now. I need to go. But yeah, thank you all for taking part in this. It was fun to do sort of a shorter stream reacting to people being weird on the internet. So yeah, that was fun. But yeah, I was just clowning him for 2 hours. Yeah. But yeah, so keep in mind I'm thinking about playing Sekiro on ESAS just because it's the From Software game that I've not finished that's in this Souls sort of variety. So I'm thinking about doing that at some point. I might do it after we finish some videos, like all the videos I have planned, because I've got like another 3, basically like another like 2 or 3 videos to watch on my list right now. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I plan to play Sekiro at some point. We're gonna get loads of deaths in Sekiro. Oh, I know. I know. But we'll see how that goes. Anyway, I really gotta pee, but I just yeah. Oh man, I really gotta go. I mean, I do agree that people have a bias towards DS1, especially if they haven't played it in a long time. But overall, this video was bad. Yeah, it's a really bad defense of it. Like, there are things to praise in Dark Souls 2, but there are a lot of problems with it too. And I think just people need to quit thinking everybody else has a hate boner, right? Just, oh man. But anyway, I really got to go. I really got to pee, and I really got to eat. So thank you all for watching, and hopefully I will see y'all next Saturday.